I've come here today to declare our independence from the tyranny of corruption, which robs us of affordable lives, our hope, our patriotism, our ideals, our freedoms, and ultimately our sense of ourselves as a good and capable people. Is healing our divided nation possible? Let's go take back our country. I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I approve this message. My job is to tell people the truth, and if the Americans have an appetite for that, that I will be president.
This is a time to bring America back together. We have been torn apart.
The reason people were having fights with their family is because the families were being lied to about information. Some family members believe the lies, some did not.
We are absolutely up against a major media wall.
And that caused the polarization, and it amplifies the vitriol. It poisons all of society when the government is lying, when the media is lying to you.
It's really hard to tell how many people are awake and how much this is exposed to the average American because we're living in a sea of propaganda and censorship.
The people standing here today do not identify with any political party. We identify with unity, with health, with freedom. That's what's important about today.
My mission over the next 18 months of this campaign, throughout my presidency, will be to end the corrupt merger of state and corporate power that is threatening now to poison our children and our people with chemicals and pharmaceutical drugs, to strip mine our assets, to hollow out the middle class, and keep us in a constant state of war. When we destroy a species, when we destroy a special place, we're diminishing our capacity to sense the divine. We deserve a president in this country who cares about these things and who talks about these things to the American people. My father, when he came back one time from the Delta, he said, and when you get older, I want you to help those people. And when I'm president, I'm going to be president for those people. You give me a piece of ground and a sword, and I am going to take back this country with your help, the help of all the homeless Republicans and Democrats and independents who are Americans first. We're going to do a mass experiment, a new kind of mass experiment of what happens when you tell people the truth, and see what happens.
I feel like the whole country needs to know what's going on here. It's bigger than alarming.
This is the worst I've ever seen it.
I witnessed this dystopian nightmare of this uncontrolled flow of desperate humanity crossing the border and converging here because of misbegotten policies by high leadership of the United States.
When President Biden took office, he signed some executive orders that basically halted all wall construction. It put our agents at risk, it put the migrants at risk, it incentivized the profit making for the smugglers.
At the end of the day, this is a business. Billions and billions of dollars every month are earned from transporting people across into the United States.
These kids are being exploited all along this track. There's nothing humane about any of this.
In this room, obviously, we designed it to be as comfortable as we can possibly make it, because the reality is no child should ever have to come to this exam room.
Mi señora y mi hija están conmigo, pero mi hija de 18 años, no sé dónde está.
We see a lot of violence as people are making across the border through Mexico or their countries. We see that devastation in the human lives.
What happens if the family doesn't have the money to buy the plane ticket?
Well, FEMA reimburses us. We can buy the ticket and
So you buy the ticket for them?
Yes.
They were told they could get a bite at the American dream here, and that dream becomes a nightmare along the journey.
Thank you.
5, 4, 3, 2. Oh, am I off? Go.
Hello, and welcome to today's discussion about AI.
Today, we'll be discussing how AI is changing the world today and how it will shape our future, and what role the government can and should play in steering the course of this incredibly powerful technology going forwards. My name's Ian Carroll. I'm just a regular guy who likes to ask questions, listen to perspectives from all sides. We'll be joined shortly by Robert Kennedy Jr., an independent presidential candidate. We're joined by Nicole Shanahan, independent vice presidential candidate. Today on our panel as well is Paul Buchheit. He was the 23rd employee at Google. He is the original creator of Gmail, an advisor to multiple AI startups, and he is credited with first bringing the phrase, "Don't be evil," to Google. Also joining us today is Creon Levitt. First started studying AI in 1979 when he read Minsky's book, Perceptrons, in high school, and he first realized it had been misunderstood. He continued studying throughout the AI winter of the 1980s when almost no one else was, and he spent 32 years at NASA as an applied physicist and then 8 years as director of R&D at Planet Labs. For the last year and a half, he's been tech lead for AI at Planet Labs. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And to start our conversation off today, I would love to go to you, Nicole, asking about the government's role in our daily lives and how AI is now in all of our phones and all of our devices, monitoring what we do, what content is posted to our social media apps, and the fine line between protecting us from illegal content and, that which might be worth taking off the internet versus censoring opinions, censoring speech, as we have seen in the UK, as we've seen over the last several years in our own country here in the United States. Nicole, what's your opinion about the government's role in regulating AI and using AI to regulate people in social media?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And thanks everyone who's joining. I bet people are still getting on right now. And Bobby will be joining us. He's wrapping up an interview. He'll be with us shortly. So I oftentimes say that the United States is best situated to deal with possible risks of AI because we have the Constitution. And it's amazing that our founding fathers almost anticipated something like this would happen. Some overwhelming power, the evolution of the reach of the government. And they anticipated that the people of this country would need a founding document to ensure that they had the tools and rights to defend themselves against the government. So when we think about AI's reach, it is enormous. It's nearly unlimited. I was just reading about the AI Act of Europe, their most recent update around prohibitive applications. And I would say that we already have AI in that territory, defined as prohibitive applications. And the US government has access to some of these already. Some of these include using AI to manipulate the public, using AI to get people to act in certain ways. That is expressly in Article 5 of the AI Act of Europe, states that these are entirely prohibited from being used. So in the United States today, we don't have anything specific around AI regulation. Typically what happens is that Brussels will pass an act like the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which passed many years ago, and California adopted it. And at the time, it was viewed that the GDPR was one of the most strict privacy laws protecting individual privacy. So that right to be forgotten, that came from the GDPR. We are looking now at the AI Act of Europe and thinking, many of us in the legal field thinking, well, it seems like if the trend continues, California may adopt a similar AI Act, such as this, in which we would have additional protections. Usually these protections are targeted at private corporations, but you would think that they would apply to government use of AI. And when you think about where the government is today and how they're accessing data, we have now 10 good years of evidence of social media collecting our data and packaging it and making it available for sale in a multitude of ways. We're aware of certain contracts between these large tech companies and the government to access our data. There's backdoors to almost every one of our cell phones. The recent Foreign Intelligence Act doesn't require a warrant, and the warrant amendment was not passed by Congress, which was a huge blow. And so I think as we think about where we need to be focusing our efforts right now is putting the Constitution first, because it is the one document we have at our disposal to really ensure that individual liberties are protected as we wait for the next round of regulation.
Really well said. And I think a lot of what you're saying kind of speaks to the fact that AI is new and human rights are old, and we're still figuring out how to merge these two worlds of the new and the old without losing what's so essential to being an American. And Paul, I know that you don't still work at Google and you haven't worked at Google for quite some time, but maybe you have some sense of when you were working at Google, was AI in any way a technology being used? Did you see the sort of introduction of AI into these sort of mainstream tech spaces? What's the timeline on AI being involved in these apps?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this comes down to a debate about what AI is. Even now, you'll have people saying it doesn't exist. But absolutely, Google has arguably always been an AI company. Part of the original insight that it's built upon is that if we have a lot of data and a lot of computation, we can surface a lot of interesting insights. And actually, one of the early versions of this that a lot of people are familiar with is the "Did you mean" feature, right? The spell corrector on Google, where you can kind of just type in whatever misspelled thing and it figures it out. And that was actually something that I added very early on because I'm not good at spelling. And so I was interviewing, trying to find an engineer who could make it better because I wanted to build a spell corrector that could correct my last name, for example. And so I used it as an interview question. And the only person who gave a really amazing answer was this guy, Noam Shazir. And he's the person who then we hired, and he built the feature that we know today as "Did you mean?" But then, decades down the line, or maybe 15 years down the line, he is also kind of one of the key people who invented what we think of as AI today, with his paper "Attention is All You Need," and that kind of defined the technology that enables ChatGPT and all of these breakout AI applications we're seeing now.
Because it seems to me, if I understand correctly, that in order to predict what someone meant, you need to in some way have a model of what they might mean and start to predict. It's like, you're trying to predict behavior, and that then transfers forwards to now they're monitoring behavior and predicting behavior and trying to figure out what we can and cannot say and do. And that has been all over the news lately in terms of certain AIs that are, because AI is pushing so fast now that we've all seen the new AIs come out, and some of them are not being allowed to give certain answers or not being allowed to generate certain types of images, and you can make an argument probably for both sides of that. That kind of leads us to talking about AI image generation and AI content generation. And I think a lot of people are familiar with sort of the like doom and gloom, the bad side of, oh no, what if all videos, we can't tell if anything is real anymore. We live in the Matrix. And I do hope we can talk about that. But I think a lot of people don't think about all the good that AI can do in terms of data processing, image generation, et cetera. And Creon, you're, if I understand correctly, deeply involved with some of the good that AI can do in terms of taking massive amounts of data and creating, I don't know if it's necessarily images, but usable information out of AI aggregation. Could you explain a little bit about how you guys are using satellite data in order to give the people something that we wouldn't have had without AI?
Well, this is in fairly early stages right now, but the company I have worked with for many years, Planet Labs, has launched over 500 satellites to image the Earth. And don't be too concerned. They can't see people. They're not reading license plates. They are more for like broad area scanning for agriculture, natural disasters, that sort of thing. But the problem is that's like 10 terabytes of image data every day that come down from our satellite constellation. And there's no way humans can actually look at that much. And so for some years now, we have always thought that, once AI is ready, it will help us basically ask questions of this large image archive and get answers rather than just getting millions and millions of images, each containing millions and millions of pixels. And so we've made substantial progress on that recently. And to be clear, this is not image generation. The images we get are actual photographs taken from space of the Earth by the satellites. What we're talking about is image analysis, which has been a thing that has been done for a long time using computer vision and image processing. It's just that now it's gotten up, many orders of magnitude better and more general. So like we can give our systems a sample of a kind of thing that we're looking for, like a ship spilling oil or something like this, and it can just scan through the whole database and find further examples, or we can give it an example of some military encampment, and it can find similar. And so that's just one example, but that's not image synthesis, image generation, generative AI per se. And I'm a little bit personally skeptical that generative AI is going to have a great beneficial effect. Yes, it's going to put a lot of artists out of work. Yes, it's going to make a lot of fakes. I'd love to hear some really positive use cases for generative AI, but that's perhaps a side topic compared to some of the
I want to briefly welcome Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to the discussion. Thanks for joining us, Bobby. You are coming in just as we're starting to talk about AI's role in the internet and censorship, and I think you probably have a lot to say about that. So thanks for joining us. And if I could pass the ball to you, Bobby, and ask you, as we're seeing in the UK with them kind of moderating content online and going after citizens for their online posts, and having seen how you have been treated by the American media over here for the last 4 years, what do you think is the government's role in both moderating the speech and content of its citizens? And should the government be using AI for such things or regulating AI and such things? What's the line with AI and free speech on the internet?
Well, I'm pretty much a free speech absolutist. I think we've all been subject to kind of a psyop over the last couple of years where we've been taught to fear what they call misinformation. And that is, I think it was learned at hand, or actually Judge Brandeis, who said that the remedy for bad information is more information. It's never, cutting off the information supply. And the First Amendment protects lies and bad speech. And in fact, the First Amendment was passed not to protect convenient speech or the speech that people, everybody wants to hear. It was enacted in order to protect the speech nobody wants to hear, the difficult speech, the problematical speech, the dissenting speech. And we're seeing, we've been told now, we're year after year, every time I hear somebody say, oh, we have to, misinformation is this huge threat to us, I don't believe that's true. I think if there's misinformation, the way to deal with it is by more information, and not by scaring people the misinformation. Listen, my kids, all of them, because they grew up in this age, they know the difference they know when they're being manipulated. I get manipulated by AI all the time because somebody will send me something. I'll go, holy cow, did you see this? And send it to my kids. My kids will say, that's fake, Dad, immediately. So, people know that when they read something on the internet, they have to read it critically. And that's inherently
a patronizing stance, right? To pretend like our citizens don't have the brain power to discern for themselves and to listen to ideas they don't agree with and make up their own minds.
Right. And the government is not, let's get this straight. The government is not stealing your tongue or Donald Trump's tongue or Elon Musk's tongue because they're scared that he's going to tell lies. They're stealing his tongue because they don't want him to tell the truth.
Yeah, great
That's
line.
what they're scared of. They're terrified of the truth. They're not terrified of lies. The lies, we all can say that's a lie, right? It's the truth they don't want you to hear. And that's why they want to silence us. And that's why they've been scaring the hell out of us about, misinformation. Anytime you hear somebody saying misinformation is scary, you are being subject to a psyop, because misinformation is not scary. It's just something we have to deal with. We've always had to deal with it. There's a lot more out there now, but, people know it. People know that the internet can't be believed, that that they have to read it critically. And that is the skill we need to teach people, not to pretend that there's some neutral arbiter out there who is going to protect us from bad information. That neutral arbiter is going to turn evil Darth Vader immediately. The second you give somebody power to regulate what we hear and what we don't hear, they're turning into Darth Vader.
Yeah, my experience on social media as a content creator, often speaking about things that are, misinformation, is that we are already being censored by AI, because that is the way that currently social media platforms are doing their content moderation. Is they have AI algorithms that are just screening for everything that goes online. And obviously there's an argument for that, because you want to, protect users from things that are genuinely illegal or horrible, like, for example, like child abuse materials or things like that. So we currently already have AI in our digital social spaces. And as Creon points out, AI can process terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data in a way that humans never could. So AI enables this mass surveillance in a way that the Patriot Act might not even have been able to foresee, right? Do you guys, I'd be curious if
pedophilia, by the way,
mm-hmm.
and is not protected speech. So you can regulate that and you can prosecute it. And there's all kinds of ways to deal with certain categories of speech, like terrorism or whatever, that, it's illegal, and there are other ways to deal with it. And we should be dealing with it, and we should be prosecuting it and punishing it. But
I completely agree.
What the European Union tried to do the other night, which is to stop Elon Musk from talking with the former president of the United States, who is currently the nominee of a political party. And I'm not, a fan of Donald Trump's. I'm running against him and trying to beat him. But every American should be disgusted. This is rank election interference. The European Union, people were complaining that Russia was interfering in our election. Well, here's the European Union doing it right out in the open, saying we're not going to allow people to hear this. And by the way, there's millions, tens of millions of American expatriates who live in Europe and who vote. So they're saying to them over there, you're not allowed to hear one of the political parties in your country who you're going to vote for. It's really, they should be, if this country were working, the president and Congress would be sending subpoenas to that guy, what's his name, Thierry Badot or whatever, whoever, the guy who signed that letter, and they should be, threatening to arrest him if he comes to this country, and they should, what he did is so bad. And the fact that there's not this upswell, this tsunami of outrage against him, that Congress is not meeting to, deliberate and to punish Europe for this atrocity is itself should be.
Interestingly, the EU did issue a statement disagreeing with the letter that was issued prohibiting it, and they spoke. Our Congress has not spoken, which is it's
concerning.
It's concerning.
But of course, we have seen how our own government is perfectly happy to ask for social media companies to take down speech that they don't agree with, to ask for social media companies and tech companies.
Like Bobby's speech, for instance.
Exactly.
Just
I can't help but notice that supporting and talking about a lot of what Bobby has talked about is deemed misinformation by the current status quo in our tech world, right?
Yeah. And I actually think the Harris campaign asked that for that censorship of that Elon conversation, which is just, it's really frightening. It's frightening that our political leaders think it's okay to censor people for any reason. And yeah, I mean, I have an injunction right now against President Biden. And the judge in that case, Judge Terry Doty, federal judge, district court judge, said that he goes through the chronology and it says that President Biden's administration, 37 hours after he took the oath of office, swearing to uphold the Constitution, they had already created a portal in the White House where the CIA, the FBI, CISA, which is this terrible agency that was created as the hub of all censorship, in our country, NIH, the IRS, the CDC, all had access to this portal to censor Americans who were making statements that were contrary to their official policies. And when the government can silence its opponents, it has a license for any kind of atrocity. And so I now have an injunction. Terry Doty, Judge Doty, said it was the worst. It was the worst act of censorship in American history. That's a quote from his opinion.
The worst act of censorship in American history so far.
That's a high bar.
Well, yeah, they've outdone
exactly.
themselves.
And I know that we could talk about this aspect of AI all day long because it's on everyone's minds and it's present in all of our lives. But I also want to go deeper into some more specific topics that a lot of the people that have submitted questions were also asking about. And the big one that I think needs a lot of attention is jobs and the economy and just the massive amount of change that's coming to everyday Americans' lives. And I think that both Paul and Creon both work in fields where they've seen AI completely revolutionize the way that those jobs can be done and the way that people are needed in those fields versus machines needed in those fields. So I'd love to get Paul and Creon a brief take on how have you, and maybe I'm not right, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but have you seen people being replaced by AI? Have you seen people being enhanced by AI? What's your take on jobs, Paul, in sort of the tech world that you've inhabited?
I mean, I think it's certainly starting to happen. There's a lot of customer service type things where the AI bots are getting pretty good, but I actually do think the emphasis on freedom of speech is the right place to think about even this question, because it comes down to a question of control, right? And the reason that misinformation is such an important thing to preserve, to protect, is because misinformation is a lot of times just something which is a threat to those who have the power to censor, right? Because censorship can only ever serve power by definition, because powerless people can't censor. And so I think that's why it's the fundamental question for AI as well, is the AI used to augment the abilities and the rights of the individual, or is it used to crush the individual? Yeah. And I think that has to be the fundamental underlying question. And then that feeds into these other issues of employment or whatever else. If the AI is something that's completely locked down by a couple of big tech companies and the Department of Safety, or whatever sort of dystopian thing California or Europe comes up with, then it will inevitably be used just to control people, limit what we can say, what we can do, our ability to travel, our ability to even compose thoughts that run contrary to the narrative. But the positive use case, I think, for AI is if we think about it kind of really as augmenting individuals' abilities. And that's part of the reason why I even mentioned like the spell check earlier, is it's the most basic thing. I was just never good at spelling, and now I have the computer that helps me out. And the same thing goes for the so-called generative AI, AI art. I'm not a very talented artist either, unfortunately. But now, if I want to make a cute little image, or I want to depict something, I now have the ability to create these really cool images. And that isn't, in theory, that may be displacing a job, but it's not like I was going to hire an artist before to do that work, right? What we've really done with these technologies is we open up what it is an individual is capable of. And my hope is that as long as we're able to continue making the AI free free of restriction, that is, and accessible to as many people as possible, it enables everyone to essentially live their best life. And while inevitably some jobs are eliminated, we're also going to invent a lot of new things that maybe weren't possible in the past, simply because we didn't have either the time or the resources or the ability to coordinate with one another.
Yeah, there's something there I want to come back to in just a second, but I want to get your take, Creon, and because you work in somewhat like government and government adjacent fields of the very high tech industries. Have you seen AI replacing jobs? Have you seen it enhancing? What's your take on that?
In my kind of sequestered world of that, it has mostly so far been augmenting people and making them more productive. At least the ones who are kind of savvy and smart and quick, which you kind of have to be to work in these high-tech fields, they adopt it and they become more productive. So we haven't yet seen, as far as I know, a lot of layoffs of scientific and technical people because of AI. But, you know, it's coming. Like, we know driverless trucks and, you know, like, look what happened to travel agents back in the first internet wave. We know some things like this are going to happen. That's kind of unavoidable. And, you know, it's going to be a difficult transition for a lot of people, and we need to be careful. Yeah, but so far where I am, what I've seen is, I think it was Tim Leary who was the first person who mentioned it, who said, I'm more interested in IA, intelligence amplification, than I am in AI, artificial intelligence. And I think if we view these things as intelligence amplifiers, then they will benefit everybody. Like, soon, everyone, assuming the AIs are not censorious and super biased, if soon everyone will have not exactly an expert, but a competent research assistant or multiple that they can deploy to answer all kinds of questions. They could never afford a team of researchers, but everyone will have this now. The key thing is to make sure that the models are not controlled either directly or indirectly by a censorious government. And to that end, I want to just mention one thing, because Nicole especially, and Bobby may be interested in this. One of the more interesting developments, and there are many, in the kind of subtle questions of quote unquote AI safety, is this thing that came from Anthropic, one of the more interesting, large and effective AI companies. Came out a few years ago. It's called constitutional AI. And there, instead of having a bunch of, like, basically censors or trainers or reinforcement people in the back room deciding what the AI can say and can't say behind closed doors, constitutional AI lays out a constitution in plain language for the principles by which an AI is supposed to choose which answers it might provide when there are multiple answers. You write a constitution which says what are the principles that the AI is going to choose, and then you use a second AI to sort of rank and filter the answers from the first AI based on the logic of this constitution. Now, of course, it's not perfect, but it's nice because it's out there. These constitutions can be made, different ones by different companies. Ideally, we'll have AIs that are our own to work with and control. They may come with a default constitution, which may even be influenced by local laws. But then if you can change this constitution, like I might say, oh yeah, the AI, according to its constitution, is supposed to downrank or outright prohibit information that might be harmful to children, even if it's true. And I might say, but I'm not a child, and I'm not showing this to my child, so I want to strike that clause from the Constitution and add a different one. And now it will provide different answers. So constitutional AI is one of many interesting technologies that I encourage people who are interested in both the AI and constitutional law to look into.
You're reading my mind, Creon. And Nicole, I want to add a little bit to that question and throw it to you, just because I think a lot of people currently think of AI as just existing in the computer, in the digital realm. But if anyone has seen Elon's testing of the Optimus robot, we are not even 10 years away from having walking robots that have AIs inside of them, similar to the iRobot movies as like the sort of simple layman's example here. And so I would love, Nicole, for you to kind of fill us in. Is there currently any sort of legal framework around this type of constitutional AI? Is there any kind of legal structure governing AIs as persons with personhood and rights? And should there be? How do we address this?
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit of it earlier with prohibitive acts. And the way that the AI Act of Europe is designed, it's a pyramid. They really wanted to make it visual. And the top of the pyramid is completely prohibitive acts. And those include things like Minority Report-esque algorithms that will track you and predict whether or not you're going to commit a crime. Collecting of your personal information and trying to deduce social scores, that's prohibitive. I think that's a really important one. And then there's other ones that are really interestingly discussing mind control. So using AI to study your habits, getting you to act on behalf of whomever is instituting the AI for some ulterior motive. They talk a lot about violent acts against others. And so there is a general recognition of the power, the psychological power of these algorithms. Very, very powerful. They understand us. They can study us. They can get us to actually do things. They can manipulate us in very, very powerful ways.
But how do we distinguish between mind control and just effective persuasion based on critical argumentation that happens to come from an AI?
I think that's a really good question. And I think that's the difference between providing information and, providing designed algorithms to get you to accomplish a certain task that is being defined by the AI. And that definition is really, really important, because if the AI is defining what its ultimate goal is for you and you are not defining it for yourself, that is when you lose agency. That is when you are being manipulated. So talking about the constitution of the AI, one of them should be ensuring that the individual is able to have informed consent without being manipulated into a specific direction. Maybe outlining contradictory options or contradictory arguments, which are very, very important. And then, going to the machine and algorithm interface, that is where I think things haven't been well defined at all. There was a party here in Silicon Valley a few weeks ago that had machine dogs running around the party, and they were programmed to behave like a pet, an organic dog that you would have, and they would roll over and snuggle and try to grab, pretend to want a treat. So clearly these machines can be programmed with very, very specific boundaries. No one's really defining what those boundaries are. Bobby did say it earlier, and he said it very well, that there are existing laws that can dictate and protect what AI can and cannot do. If that robotic dog is injuring someone and it is, assaulting an individual, there are criminal laws protecting us from that machine dog. Just the same way as an organic dog. But then you talk about, well, who ultimately has the liability? It would be the individual either owning the dog, or it would be the corporation who assembled the dog. So there's, we have existing laws and frameworks that are very, very helpful already. And Europe is doing something interesting here, where they have a new product liability directive that has specific provisions for software liability, which now include AI software. So that's new. We don't have that here, but it's more than likely that will evolve in the United States as well. And then we have something called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which, you're talking about images online and copyright violations or fraud. So these are all issues of AI that if taken to the court of law, we actually have frameworks to help us address.
One thing that you hit on there that I think is really important is informed consent, right? How do you distinguish between AI giving us information in a genuine and balanced way that is not designed to convince us to buy a Procter & Gamble product, as just an example, versus AI that's just genuinely trying to provide information in an unbiased way? And Paul, this is something that I've seen you talk a fair bit about, is open source AIs versus closed source AIs. And I would bet that we all agree on this, but Paul, I would love for you to just give us like the 30-second rundown on why you think open source is the way to go. And is there even a place for closed source AIs in the future?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so closed source, most of our AIs today are closed source. The really, it's just Meta / Facebook has been, it's actually really wonderful.
Wait, really?
They I know, it's like the best thing they've ever done is they're open sourcing their AI. And you know, people actually argue about what that means, but the model itself, they freed the weights, and so people are able to build on top of it. And I think part of the reason open source is so important is because it's fundamentally kind of a censorship-proof technology, right? It's uncontrolled. And so for me, open source is kind of a litmus test for freedom. And it's not that necessarily, you know, we don't want these closed source options, but the availability of open source options means that we retain our freedom. So if the closed source ones start saying, you know, you're not allowed to talk about certain topics, you know, this guy RFK is a terrible source of misinformation. You're not allowed to say anything positive about him, right? Having those free and open options preserves our liberty because it means we always have the choice of opting out. Once things are locked down to just a couple of big companies, then it's exactly the same as we saw with social media, right? It was much more censored than I think we realized, and it's still only now coming to the surface, the mechanisms of control that were put in place so that you know, the narratives that they did not want out there, the people whose voices they wanted silenced, could be done kind of behind the scenes because, well, you know, Disney doesn't want their content next to dangerous misinformation, and so there's easy ways to hide the censorship. And I think that the exact same thing will happen with AI if it is locked down, and if there is, in particular, a lot of liability imposed on the model makers. So right now in California, there's a controversial bill that is working its way through that is trying to do exactly that. It's put liability on the model makers, which is an outrageous thing to do with a new technology. You know, it'd be like if you know, the electric motor had liability attached to it. And so, you know, if someone uses a motor to make a weapon, or, you know, someone who builds cars, you know, you don't put the liability for the misuse of the vehicle on the manufacturer, you put it on the end user.
Yeah. And what you're talking about sounds a lot to me like antitrust when we're starting to talk about having the entire space centralized into just a few companies, like has been the nature of social media for quite some time now. And one of the issues with AI is that AI training is so expensive that in order to train a large language model, you kind of need to be a multi-billion-dollar mega corporation, right?
No, you can do it for less.
Cool.
You can develop some really lean. I mean, like Claude is an example of something that is an open source training library that's really not that expensive to use. It's getting leaner very, very quickly, actually. And for a few $1 million, you can train very highly sophisticated, specific, focused AIs that can complete quite high reasoning tasks.
That's exciting.
By the way, regarding open source, Nicole just raised a very important point. Open source weights are just that's just a way to enable other people to use the system on their own, to clone the system on their own, and to modify the system on their own. But without open source training data provenance, it's not open what these systems are, why they're saying what they're saying, and how they're justifying it. So this is a problem with a lot of closed source systems, is that they're deliberately obscure about what it was trained on for various reasons, which we don't need to go into right now. But if you don't know, I mean, these are just computers. The information that comes in gets transformed into the information that goes out. And if they were just trained on material that says, so-and-so is a kook and a misinformation spreader, that's all they're going to be able to say.
Yeah, very well said.
There is something I will add to that, though, is a lot of the censorship occurs kind of at a later stage, fine tuning, you know, they call it. So there is, even when you have these open weights, it's true that there's biases built into the training data, but there's still a lot that you can do to essentially remove those biases or to alter the biases at a much lower cost than building your entire model from scratch.
So if I'm hearing what you guys are saying correctly, the AI industry is at a stage where we've gotten far enough that now actually you can train large language models for relatively cheap, and open sourcing has become at least common enough. I'm be curious, do you guys think that we're past the point where where the genie can no longer be put into the centralized bottle, so to speak, where we no longer live in a world where big corporations or governments are going to be able to monopolize the powers of AI, and it's going to be something that regular people can harness for their own benefit regardless? Or do you think that that is a concern that is still real and we should be concerned about AI
No,
technology being controlled?
it's still very early days, I would say. Like we thought early on that social media was going to have free speech. There's if we don't stay on top of it and we don't make sure that it stays free, lockdown is the natural direction for.
Yeah, and we're going to end up in a situation, arguably, like we have with the people who say, well, or like the argument that if AI is outlawed, personal AI, then only outlaws will have personal AI. And so we have to be careful about that. In fact, there may be almost like a Second Amendment argument that everyone should be able to have their own AIs, not just because it's democratic and egalitarian and prevents capture and concentration of power, but because this is a defensive technology in a way. It's like it can help you parse through arguments. It can help you defend against propaganda if it's correctly managed. And if it's in your hands, it's much more likely to be correctly managed than if it's all in the hands of the government and the big corporations.
I mean, I have a great example of what's gone on in Singapore. They've launched something called AI Verify, which is you can download it in GitHub. It's an open source library. You download it, you run your AI model against AI Verify. It provides a standard AI fairness and bias metrics, including counterfactuals, and produces then a government report. So it spits out a report that you then submit to regulators. It's almost like a TurboTax for AI compliance. But what that means is that the government has full control what your AI can and cannot do. So it's kind of the reverse of an AI constitution that's designed for the individual liberty. This one's really designed for community protection and regulation of the model itself. And so their vision, and they actually met with the National Institute of Standards and Technology last year, the United States NIST, and they were trying to convince NIST to buy into this AI Verify, which would then create a global passport. So if you've been processed through AI Verify in Singapore, you would be able to bring that AI overseas to the United States, because they would have a bilateral agreement on acceptance of passports and verification of that AI. So it's a great concept. It would be wonderful if individual liberties, free speech, all the things in the Constitution that we hold so dearly were embodied in that AI Verify. But there's, of course, the risk there. So we are very much in the early days. I agree very much with Paul on that sentiment.
I mean, obviously all of these, topics of discussion we could stay on for forever, but one that I don't want to skip over before we end is AI in the economy, and AI in the stock markets, and AI in the financial systems, because in many ways, although I think to the average citizen it's been hidden, AIs and trading algorithms in general have been progressing in the financial world before in many other places. And that's often the case where technologies are often deployed in the places where they can make money the fastest, because the more money in a space, the more incentivized people are to progress in that space. And so, Bobby, you have spoken several times about regulations in the stock market, regulations in the financial industry. Do you have any sense of, in a Kennedy administration, is there any level of regulation of algorithmic trading in the stock markets, AIs in the stock markets, and giant institutions leveraging their somewhat outsized ability to leverage these technologies in the stock markets against regular people? Or do you think that the free market will naturally sort it out? What's your opinion of AI in financial spaces?
I mean, I would assume that, to me, it's kind of it's a terrifying prospect because it does tend to tend to enhance the power of of large agglomerations of power. It tends to multiply their power. And I mean, what the analogy to me is kind of daunting because somebody, I think Grion pointed out earlier that when social media began, Mark Zuckerberg was a hero to us all because he promised to democratize information. He promised that that social media and all of these guys did. They promised that social media was going to democratize the planet, that it was going to put power and information in the hands of the poor, of working people, of common people, and that it was going to be a tool for democracy around the globe. And it turned out, of course, to be really just a weapon of totalitarian control. And I'm really frightened, that AI clearly has that potential in so many ways, because not only does it allow large accretions of power to multiply their power and control, but it gives government this extraordinary capacity at surveillance, and Minority Report, which Nicole mentioned earlier, is a predictor of the kind of future that we could have. And it gives government this power to completely distort our realities, to control our perception of reality, and to surveil every transaction, every interaction, every really almost down to every thought that we had. The ultimate ambition of every totalitarian regime throughout the history of mankind is total control of human behavior, and none of them have been able to manage that. But AI would give them that power, and I think that the most likely outcome for AI is that. Now, there's also an opportunity, if we get the right leadership, to make AI to do the opposite, to make it a tool by which the public can make government serve its interests, and make government more transparent, to make to put the public in control over civic functions. But I think we really need the right leadership to do that, and I don't think that the leading presidential contenders have even thought this through. And one of the things I've said about AI is you can't overregulate it, because if America decides to overregulate it, we're going to drive it into Singapore and into China and into Dubai and Iran and Russia. And so it really, you need somebody who's controlling the trajectory of this, who is super smart, who brings in the best minds, who is able to reach out to these other nations to make sure that we have global regulation that is fair and that is serving the interests of humanity, because otherwise this is just going to become a terrible, terrible instrument for social control. And I think that that is, in my estimation, that, I have never seen a technology that was not exploited by totalitarian regimes to the maximum effect possible.
Yeah, it's incredibly nuanced, right?
But
it's incredibly nuanced, as in we can't just regulate the heck out of it, but we also can't let it run free, right?
Right.
I have a question here for the legal scholars like Nicole and Mr. Kennedy. To some extent, is the issue really a question of regulating a particular technology or not? Or in the United States, at least, is it a question of enforcing our existing laws, of course, starting with the Constitution and going down, which already, arguably, with some exceptions like CISA, they say what you're supposed to do. No government censorship of political speech, direct or indirect. no warrantless surveillance on American people by American security agencies. It's like we've got the laws. Don't we just have to enforce them on this technology and social media technology, and you name the technology, rather than spinning up special purpose codes and regulations for this one technology, which soon enough will be augmented by another one?
Well, I do think you're right. I mean, that the principles of regulation are outlined by the Constitution, but I do think that you need that there are, that the framers of the Constitution had no clue what was coming down the pike, and they had no way to predict what any of this technology, including AI. So I do think you need specific regulations. And I think a lot of people on this call have talked about, one of the key factors that we should be, that is the most obvious thing, which is to have open source algorithms, so that because if it's open source, then it's going to manipulate us no matter what. But if it's open source, at least you know how you're being manipulated, and you're able to manipulate yourself, right? And so, and I don't think that that's something that is, naturally assumed by the writing of the Constitution. I think you actually need somebody smart to apply the regulations that reflect the constitutional values to this specific technology.
Priyan, you bring up a really interesting point in that maybe the problem is not that we don't have laws to regulate these things. Maybe the problem is that we have a corrupt government that is already breaking the laws that we have in all sorts of manner in the digital space and beyond, right?
A corrupt government who is totally, in a way, I won't say free, but apparently thinks they're free to use AI, whether open source or not, to surveil and to manipulate. And I don't think, while I'm for open source, I don't think that open source is going to solve the problem of government, of dirty tricks. They'll just use the open source stuff, especially if it's better. And then they'll use it for the exact same stuff, surveillance, manipulation. And so it's open source, it still doesn't.
I mean, by open source, what I really meant is transparent algorithms. If Google, right now, if there's a Republican and a Democrat living next door to each other, and they ask the same question at Google, they're going to get different answers, because the algorithm is going to read what their preference is. And the purpose of the algorithm is to keep eyeballs on the site as long as possible. And it understands that it does that by feeding information that fortifies an existing worldview. And then there's other things that the algorithm is doing that we don't know. I mean, our campaign, for example, we believe that we are being censored by Twitter, and we're being shadow banned. And we also knew that Elon would not want to be censoring us. So, but we were watching things happen. We were watching our followers were sending us screenshots that showed them following us, and then immediately it would put unfollow. And so, and many people were sending us that, I tried to follow you and it immediately unfollowed me. And we started sending those to James and Elon Musk, and that prompted them to go back. This is only a week ago. After us complaining for a year, we are being censored. And my Twitter account could not grow over 3 million. It grew very rapidly to 3 million, and then it just stopped. And they then came back to us last week and they said, we found it. It was embedded in an algorithm. We didn't know about it, and we've removed it now. So that's what I mean. We need transparent algorithms, so people know, when they're being censored, when they're being manipulated, and and you can choose your own algorithm. You can say, I want a Republican news cycle, I want a Democratic news cycle, and at least then you're manipulating yourself. But every individual should be able to look at the algorithms by which he's being manipulated.
And arguably, a potential regulation should be something like, and there's a huge amount to be said here, it should be something like, if an AI system, especially a government or big tech controlled
I
one.
think I lost them.
Oh,
I still got you.
okay. There's an argument that says that a regulation should possibly be something like, any algorithm controlled by some big power center, government or not, if it's going to tell you X, it should also tell you, here are the counter arguments to X. And it should give citations and references where possible, because that's what critical thinking is all about. And quite frankly, I maintain that if you truly have a question that polarizes people, where there's disagreement, and you ask an AI system or a good researcher to drill down on the arguments and counter arguments and counter arguments to every question of this nature, what you'll find is that the reason reasonable people might disagree on something, and there's so many arguments and counter arguments, is because we don't actually know the answer. And the AIs are really bad at saying we don't know the answer. They always pretend like they know the answer. They're like a precocious, smart kid who pretends smarter than they are.
Yeah, like I would love to see confidence variables coming with the results. Like if Grok could give us a confidence variable on its summary, that would be really great. If it had the ability to audit itself, that would, make people feel a lot more comfortable. And I think that's where the competition lies now. We really are in the AI arms race, and it's happening in the private sector and it's happening at the government level as well. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. The companies that are going to win are going to be the ones that give people the greatest confidence.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's exactly the answer to a lot of these things. I don't have a lot of confidence that we're going to come up with a regulation that somehow delivers the perfect result. But what does work is freedom and choice, and enabling individuals to choose, which AI they want working for them. And I also like to think a lot in terms of defensive AI, right? There is true misinformation or bad information out there. There's all these threats. There's the deceptive advertising. There's everything else. But I like to think in terms of, what do I personally want is actually an AI agent who works on my behalf, who helps me to filter through all of these things. The scams are only going to get worse. When you get a phone call from a family member, who's locked up in prison and desperately needs $1,000 in Home Depot gift cards, or this is going to happen very soon. We need the AI to help honestly protect us from the adversarial AIs. Adversarial AI is inevitable. And so what we need are defensive AIs. And I think that goes in a lot of directions. Like, wouldn't it be amazing if everyone had access to top quality legal advice, right? And right now, you have to be not even a single digit millionaire, right? You have to have a lot of money if you're going to pursue a serious legal case. With AI, we can potentially give top-notch legal representation to every individual.
Yeah, I actually have a really good DLA Piper example to share if we have time for it.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Nicole, you've got something to talk about on this one.
Yeah. So my background is legal tech and AI. And one of the fellows from my center at Stanford recently published a study related to DLA Piper, in which they looked at 11 senior level attorneys. And they had those attorneys review 5 contracts and identify if there were contradictory terms in the contracts. And part of this was they're measuring it against an annotated model, an existing annotated model in a database, and they were trying to figure out how much agreement amongst the attorneys there would be. And these were very well-paid senior level attorneys that you would pay, $600 an hour for. And in all of their findings, the attorneys only agreed on 2 out of 43 of the contradictions. They only found agreement amongst 2. And they felt that they were going to be able to argue on behalf of the other contradictions that they had outlined, even though that the ones that they had identified were different than the other attorneys. So it's I think that there is an argument for personalization of AI as well. Going back to the labor market, there's definitely room for human intelligence. And it's actually the diversity of thought and non-standardization of thought that makes us competitive and that makes the economy run well. And so I don't think that we are facing anytime soon an mass elimination of jobs. I think that, to Paul's point, I think that AI is going to be a great partner in helping us optimize and think through our own creative lens and our own personalized professional experiences.
Yeah. I want to quickly take a moment to wrap up this first part of the conversation, although I think that our Q&A after this brief announcement is going to be very much following in the same tracks as what we're already on. But we're going to briefly pass the mic to Del, who has some message from the Kennedy campaign, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
Hey, everybody. I am the Director of Communications for Robert Kennedy Jr. I just want to point out that we've just watched Nicole Shanahan answer more questions than Kamala Harris has in 2 weeks in the last hour. Bobby Kennedy, of course, we're used to him answering questions all day, every day. But it's a sight and a look into your choices now in the United States of America. Do you want a propaganda media machine that absolutely supports a candidate that cannot speak to the public? Or do you want candidates that are actually looking at and discussing the most important issues of our time? If AI is not one of those issues, then I don't know what is. And I can't remember the last time I even saw Donald Trump sit down to talk about AI in this level of depth. I can tell you, having traveled all around this country and worked with Bobby Kennedy, you've never met anyone that's more dedicated to all of the ideas, to listening to all of the thought leaders on every issue and come up with ideas. This is what it means when you're watching a president that cares about the people, when you're watching someone that's saying, I want to hand this country back to the people. We are looking at very serious issues now in our future. And we could just go with partisan politics. We could have a divided nation that can't get anything done and scream and yell at our television sets every single day because only half the country is supporting what is going on while the other half is ready for a civil war. Or we can start uniting America and get behind a ticket right now that is asking all the right questions, talking about all the right things, and is not striking out and attacking, the opponents, but saying, let's have a discussion. Let's get into debate. Let's start talking about the United States of America, where we sit in the world. I want to say this. Those other two candidates have billionaires. All the corporate interests that are controlling our government right now are funding them on a daily basis. 100 times what we're bringing in to this presidential campaign. But if you want a country for the people and by the people, having the conversations you care about, why don't you donate now? Honestly, your $5 or $10 in a donation right now changes the world. It changed the world. Even if all you ever achieve is to put Bobby Kennedy and Nicole Shanahan on the debate stages so that we force the other people that are running for president to actually start talking like adults and discussing the issues that we actually care about. We need dialogue in this country. We are the United States of America, and we are losing our moral foothold in the world because we're too busy screaming at each other than actually getting down to the problem. So right now, make a difference. Be one of those people that says, you know what? I look back in history and you can tell your grandkids, guess who donated to Robert Kennedy Jr. when everyone else was saying, oh, he couldn't win or he didn't have a chance. Why don't you bet on something that matters? Why don't you vote with your dollars right now? $5, $10. If you can give $100, just go to Kennedy 24. You have the link right here. You can see it. Make a difference right now. Help us get the word out that thinking still exists, that good, conversation is what we represent, and the ability to have differences of opinion, but to come together to discuss the issues of our time. And I will tell you this, every one of you watching right now knows you have a corrupt government. You are watching the DNC. They selected the next choice for president without a single electorate, not a single citizen in this country voted for Kamala Harris. Doesn't mean she's not a great candidate. It just means you didn't get to decide whether she is. We can't be dictated to. We can't have everything decided for us. We need a government that actually trusts us. Instead, what we have is a government that doesn't trust us and trying to make the decisions for us. If you want to put this government back in the hands of the people, you can do something now. Please donate to this campaign, because really the future of our nation depends on it. Thank you all for watching this. We're going to let this go to you now. Now the people get to ask the questions you care about, and watch all of the people in this campaign are ready for your questions and not afraid of them. That's the way this should be. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thanks, Del.
Thank you. Welcome all back. Just so the audience and everybody here understands the next section of what we're going to do. I was sent a very long list of questions that were submitted by audience members that RSVP'd early, with the name of the person and the wording of the question in the exact way that they typed it out. I went through that list and I looked for questions that were very similar and questions that I thought we would probably already address in our previous discussions. And I picked out sort of 10-ish of the ones that seemed the most relevant and the most and that seemed to represent the totality of the questions the best. And one set that I was not expecting the audience to actually ask about so much is the way that AI might affect healthcare. And there were a ton of people asking about how AI might revolutionize healthcare. And some were coming at that from a health perspective, and some were coming at that from a saving government money perspective and universal healthcare type of idea. And so I've got David Breon and I've got Shannon Smith and I've got Patricia Regalia all here in front of me, but I'm going to read it in the words of David Breon, who said, and this is sort of kicking the ball to you, Nicole, and to you, Bobby, and then maybe we'll discuss it a little bit. David Breon asks, would you consider using AI to help revolutionize the healthcare system? Healthcare is one of this country's biggest expenses. Rep. David Schweikert had some amazing ideas that implementing AI can help reduce some of that spending.
I mean, absolutely. And I'll leave, Nicole's thought a lot about this, but there are already medical informatics systems operating in some countries, for example, Belize, but other countries as well that have the capacity to do the kind of studies that, drug studies, for example, that used to take 3 or 4 years or even more, but to do them instantaneously. And for example, you can look at claims from HMOs that, for example, let's say there's 3 diabetes drugs in a country. You can actually look at the outcomes instantaneously for all of those drugs and decide which one, and learn immediately which one has a risk profile with side effects, which one is providing, where people have the longest, the lowest all-cause mortality after starting that drug, and where which the most effective ones are. And you can make that assessment immediately. It may be the cheapest drug that you're using, and you can look at any drug and then you can look at outcomes. We have the data already. We have these data sets because you have the HMO data that has all of the medical interventions. It has all the drug purchases. It has all the diagnostic criteria, and you can get tremendous amounts of information out of that. I look forward to using AI to do real studies on vaccines, which are not commonly studied in pre-licensing safety studies. Well, now you can do that, and you can do it. All we have to do really is to open up these databases, which CDC has kept closed so that nobody can study them, like the Vaccine Safety Data Link, which has medical records from 10 million people in there, and you can make a lot of studies really quick. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm both an optimist for AI in healthcare, and it's one of the areas that I'm actually most concerned of as well, for the misuse within an existing healthcare paradigm that is very broken. So let's talk first about what I'm optimistic about. Bobby stated one of the areas of optimism, looking at causal factors of disease. And this is an area in which we're actually already at work. Thanks to the introduction, I've been working with Children's Health Defense, and we have a knowledge graph of all of these papers that have been censored. And part of the issue is with every AI model, if it's garbage in or if it's censored, you will get results that are garbage out and censored. So utmost importance is making sure that whenever we're training healthcare related AI models, that we're getting the full scope of expert opinions, not just those produced by big pharma, and not just those that are designed to sell us more and more drugs. So very, very important to distinguish how it could be used correctly, but also how it could be abused. And then secondarily, there's the paradigm itself of healthcare. One of my favorite neurosurgeons has said our current paradigm is like putting human biology in a blender and adding reagents to it. And when you look at how, AlphaFold from DeepMind is looking at protein science, and targeted therapies using protein-based delivery mechanisms, you're still thinking within this old paradigm of how we think about human biology. Human biology is very complex. There's many things we still don't know. So we want to use AI in that area a little bit more delicately, in my opinion, because the risks of implementing some of these therapies based on these models on cell-based therapies could, it's completely uncharted territory. And I think that we need to be very cautious about it.
I mean, let's give a really clear example here, because I'm 100% behind what you just said, Nicole. But let's say I'm, just an average person, and I get back from home from my doctor's visit, and I go to my AI assistant and I say, my doctor says I'm developing diabetes. What should I do? Now, do we want a thing which says you should take Ozempic and cut out red meat, which is stupid? Or do we want one that says you should cut out carbs, cut out refined foods, eat 2 meals a day only at most, and get out in the sun? It's like one of them makes a lot of money for pharma and is politically correct according to certain people. The other one is actually going to change your life without spending any money at all. Which one do we want? Because if we don't watch out, we're going to get the wrong one.
Mm-hmm.
Very well said. This next question I want to go to, I think, is better tailored to Paul and Creon, to you guys answering this one. And then I think we probably have time for a third one, which might tailor better to Bobby and Nicole's expertise. But obviously, we can all jump in if you guys have feelings. But Paul and Creon, to you guys, this question is about AI and education in a more broad way. It comes from Greg Shepard. And it's a little bit lengthy, but I'll try to read it all so that his words are represented. Greg asks, how do you feel AI can most optimally be used in the future education of our youth? I can imagine the advantages of an AI teacher that is 1,000,000 times more intelligent than our typical teacher, an AI teacher who can efficiently design instruction based on gargantuan of acquired related data, including educational research, capitalizing on the various learning style of each particular student, their individual interests, personal life goals, passions, etc. But how could we safeguard against the mind control agenda of the state and other involved power brokers?
That's a good question, because obviously education often just becomes indoctrination. And so to me, again, this kind of goes back to just do we have freedom, right? And the other question I think really going forward is even what is our goal of education, right? Teaching people to be simple little automatons isn't useful in a world where we've already automated all of those things, right? And so I think and again, I just take it back to my own life and my own children. What do I want for my children, or God willing, grandchildren? And a lot of it just comes down to how do you live a fulfilling life? How do you learn practical skills? And actually, I watch my son. He learns a tremendous amount from YouTube videos. He builds 3D printers. He's a blacksmith. He does knife smithing. These are all really real skills. And I think, to me, the exciting potential of AI is to say hey, what would be the best possible teacher, right? And I think a lot of times the most value that you get from a teacher is inspiration, right? Leading the student towards something they'll find fulfilling and meaningful, rather than just, rote memorization of propaganda.
I'm going to echo most of that and just say, I think, again, this is a case where the question isn't really about AI, because if we look at Google and Wikipedia and YouTube, they are, or have been, incredible educational resources. All sorts of people around the world are learning at an accelerated pace up until the point where these resources get captured, censored, etc. And so it doesn't matter really which technology you're talking about. We need to guard against capture, censorship, indoctrination, and these kinds of things. AI is just another one of these technologies. Now, the thing about AI, like with Google, it used to be, and with search engines, it used to be, everyone has access now to like a gigantic university library from their phone or their home, until the censorship started to click in. And now with AI, conceivably, ideally, everybody not only has access to this giant library, they have access to a research assistant or a team of research assistants that can go pull things out of the library that are of relevance to them. But again, the thing we have to worry about with all these technologies is to prevent them from being captured, censored, and deployed for nefarious purposes by those with a large amount of power. Now, last thing I want to say is that what's really exciting is, as Paul said, like a really good teacher not only inspires, but a really good teacher finds out what the child's natural gravitation and inspiration is. Like, this child might be interested in doing art, this child might be interested in doing science, this child might be interested in reading and writing, and it will just keep putting stuff in front of that child that keeps drawing them farther and farther into what they're passionate about. And so that's an interesting idea that AI can do, is it can hopefully help figure out for a child or any person what it is that really turns them on to learn about, and just feed them exactly the kinds of stuff that is just outside their grasp, but they will feel rewarded and inspired by grasping. Anyway, that's all.
Very well said, Creon. Nicole, Bobby, do either of you have any thoughts about education and AI, or should we move on to the next question?
Take it away, Nicole.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo challenges around indoctrination versus education, and the importance of going back to first principles of what it means to be a child that is curious, and we want to maintain that curiosity. And so I watched many kids go onto Google Classroom during the pandemic, and they lost a lot. I mean, they lost a lot of the human connection. They lost a lot of the hands-on experience. And, so the format of how technology is delivering information to our children is really, you can't underscore the importance of the physical environment for these children, and getting their hands, Paul said it, watching his child take information that he's getting from the web, but actually interpreting it into the analog world and using his hands. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that we lose them to AI indoctrination and they never get off their screens. So it comes back to the importance of the human teacher, the parent, making sure our parents feel empowered in a time when they feel like their kids are getting ripped away from them by technology. We want to make sure that's brought back to we want the family intact. We want communities intact. And these are physical communities in addition to online communities.
I couldn't agree more. Both of my parents are teacher educators, and I intimately know the struggle of teachers that generally want to do the right thing, but are inherently working in a system that is not always set up to help teachers the best way they can. And I think that AI in teaching is a similar thing, where we could live in a world where teachers are encouraged to use AI to supplement their job to help every kid thrive. Or we could wind up in a world where teachers are in a system that doesn't help them, and AI is being used in a way that just secludes kids into little screen bubbles, even more than they already are, right? Last question to close us out for the evening. And it's kind of a big one. And maybe Bobby and Nicole, you guys could start us off here, and then I think we probably all have some thoughts on this, and we've discussed it a bit. But Mary Boyson asked the question on everyone's mind: can AI be used to weed out government corruption? So rather than what AI can do to us and censor our free speech and come after us for what we think and do, can AI be turned on the government and be used to analyze government action, analyze government spending, and weed out government corruption?
I mean, I can think of some specifics that, for example, the recent Pentagon audit, the Pentagon failed its eighth audit or its 20th audit in 20 years. And it lost, I think, $4.2 trillion. And most of those losses, according to, the explanation in the audit, are a piece of equipment or materials that were purchased by the Pentagon and then lost somewhere in its stockpiles. And then, in many cases, they had to buy them again and again because they kept losing them in the stockpiles. And so there's ways to deal with that. The AI should be able to deal with that. And even if you had AI walkers that were, sent around the stockpiles to inventory every piece of equipment and every package and everything in the stockpiles and then report them back. An AI should give us the ability to look through the budget, to find waste in the budget. I can think of a million things it could do. I think the best thing it could do is if it can figure out how to win this election for us, because then we can clean up the entire budget.
Yeah. I run some models, and actually, if we had non-election, if we didn't have as much interference as we've had, we would win this election. I've run a few of these models, and they looked very promising. And one of the reasons why I joined the campaign was because I looked at the data. I looked at the trends towards Americans declaring their independence, 51% across the nation. It's only going up. It's like record numbers state by state as they register voters right now. And these trends are so predictable. But again, corruption is the problem. And no, AI itself cannot correct corruptions. Humans have to get involved. They have to get in the ring. They have to go out there. They have to really fight against the vast layers of corruption that have overtaken our government. I had no idea how deep it goes until I've run for office against some of these forces, pointing out the inconsistencies. Over the last 10 years, our media has been captured, our agencies have been captured, our DOJ has been captured. I mean, it goes on and on. So I think, but going back to the original question, let's talk about that. My dream was to go to the Government Accountability Office. If you go to the website, it looks like it was built, in like 1999. It's a really old looking website, and you can just tell the office has not aged well and could really use a facelift, and could really use some great engineers in there helping them run more efficiently. But I do think that the Government Accountability Office could be an area in which a huge amount of innovation could be deployed to track spending, to look at corruption, to go through the audits, to consolidate budgets. There's so much that can be done that just has not been done. There's not enough creativity in Washington right now. We've got to bring it. It's going to be us just continuing to push forward with this promise that greater efficiency is going to help us reduce our debt. It's going to help us deliver the services to people that they so badly need in this country, and without the kinds of money laundering schemes that are circling all around these policies.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. And with that, I'm going to wrap this all up and put a bow on it. I'm going to hand it to you in just a second, Bobby, to close us out. But first, I just want to say thank you to our panelists. Thanks, both of you guys, for joining and bringing your expertise. Paul and Creon, you both took this on somewhat late notice, and we really appreciate it because both of your diverse experience and expertise here made this a really interesting discussion for me to be a part of, to learn from, and I hope for all of our audience. I see on X there's currently 81,000 people, I believe, in the X live stream, so I can only imagine how many people are watching live across all of the platforms. And I just want to give everyone a shout out for being here and being a part of an open debate of just ideas. No one's here to tell anyone what to think or how to think, but rather to just lead by example of having different people with different opinions come together and talk about hard questions and hard concepts and try to do the human thing of figuring out what comes next. So Bobby and Nicole, thank you guys for facilitating this with your campaign and your platform. And Bobby, I'm going to hand it off to you to close us out for the evening.
I just want to thank all the hosts. I want to thank Ian, Grian, and Paul. And I'm so grateful to all of you. This has been a fantastic discussion. I want to thank Nicole for helping put this together and for her commitment to this issue, which is one of the reasons that I really wanted her to be part of the campaign, because whoever's next person in the White House, we need them to be thinking of this issue. This has to be at the forefront of their minds. And we need to understand both the perils and the promises of AI. So thank you all. Thanks for having this discussion, and God bless you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.